Peter Mark Adams challenges current academic conventions by restoring the term mysteries to the cult of Mithras, while offering a deep, well informed, and nuanced point of view. His new book, Ritual and Epiphany in the Mysteries of Mithras, is a thought provoking and rich contribution to Mithraic studies. It presents a sharp and original perspective essential for anyone interested in the Mithraic studies. The work stands out for its profound exploration of Orphic influences and theurgy within the cult of Mithras. It breathes new life into long overlooked aspects of this ancient and arcane tradition. So I'm very, very glad to have again with us Peter Mark Adams. Hello, Peter. How are you doing?
Hi there, Andrew. Lovely to see you again and talk to you. I'm especially excited because of the research I've been undertaking for the new book. So very, very glad to have this opportunity.
Well, we are very glad as usual when we have it. This is the third interview that we do with you, so we are very happy. And in this case, indeed, it's our subject, like it's properly our subject. That is the cult of Mithras.
Yeah.
So we are glad to have you here, and thank you for that. You promised in the last interview that you were working on this book, that we will release it soon, and here we are.
Yeah.
So, the origins of the Mithras cult continue to elude scholars. While some of them have successfully traced the beginnings and adaptations of various ancient cults, such as those of Isis, for instance, Dionysus, Sebastius, and others, the cult of Mithras remains puzzling. Despite extensive archaeological evidence, including temples and monuments, the primary sources of the cult resist definitive explanation. Previous theories linking it to Persia have been largely discredited for the Roman cult of Mithras, of course, and its speculated spread via Cilician pirates remains contentious. Notably absent records before the first century, the Roman cult possessed a significant challenge for historians attempting to connect it to contemporary religious landscape. According to your research, Peter, what are the roots of the cult of Mithras and why have they remained so elusive all this time?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question. Um, my research indicates that the cult's mythic and iconographic antecedents stretch back deep into prehistory, and specifically into the Anatolian and Mesopotamian prehistory. So the way I've done this is for instance, I took the iconic image of the Mithras cult, the so-called tauroctony or bull killing scene, and sought to find its iconographic precedents. And one of the earliest ones that I found was in the Epic of Gilgamesh from about 2000 BC. And the epic includes a tale called The Bull of Heaven. And in that, Gilgamesh kills the bull. And he does so by stabbing it in the area between the horns and the nape of the neck. And this was interesting. This kind of iconic image of the battle or fight with the bull of heaven resonates throughout these cultures, throughout the Bronze Age. The bull already had deep associations with the constellation Taurus. So from very early on, we see the element of the astro-religion playing a large part. So I can just quickly, let me just read out the lines from the Epic of Gilgamesh. Enkidu addresses Gilgamesh and says, I will sneak up behind the bull and grab the tail, and with my foot on its hock. And as those people who know the Mithraic tauroctony scene will be well aware, one of the puzzling aspects is that Mithras is kneeling on the back of the bull and his other leg is stretched out, pressing down the hock of the bull. And that's just too much to be coincidental. So we're tapping into a very rich stream, an inherited stream of iconography here. And the text then continues, you'll thrust your sword between the neck, horns, and spine. Again, this is exactly what we see with the bull killing scene. So this was a significant piece of evidence, to my mind, to begin looking wider for traces of this tradition in Mesopotamian and specifically Anatolian iconography. And sure enough, I found a representation. It's of a ring made for one of the Hittite kings, which clearly has a figure in one corner that looks almost identical to the bull killing scene. And on top of that, I had found access to a Hittite Mitanni peace treaty from about 1500 BC. So kind of middle Bronze Age, which cites Mitra, Indra, and Varuna as the gods overseeing the treaty. So already we're in the midst of a kind of lost iconographic tradition. It's quite clear it stretches well back into the Bronze Age. So I assume the Epic of Gilgamesh, just like the Homer's Iliad, was at one time an oral tradition. So what we're seeing is the first time it was actually written down around 2000 BC. So that gives you an idea of the depth of the roots of the iconographic tradition and the kind of spiritual significance, which remains very vague at this point in the background, because it was clearly the fact that the holding the bull's hoof down with one foot during a ritual process occurs again in the 2nd century frescoes of St. Capua Vetere Mithraea. The initiatory scene shows the initiator trapping the initiate's foot with one of his feet. So clearly the initiate in that context is kind of in the role of the bull. And it places the initiator in the role of channeling Mithras.
So actually, that's one of the things that I wanted to talk, because we talk about the Bronze Era, so that shows actually this substract that exists in all traditions, actually, right? If we go back, we will find like always evidences of things doesn't happen like that. Like some scholars pretend that the cult of Mithras was just like a new phenomenon, a new creation out of the blue. And then, out of the blue, of course, but we are taking elements from here and there, and probably there is like a discontinuum that is going on, right? So in your book, actually, you mentioned that. You mentioned also the Hellenistic provenance of the cult in Armenia, and the Hellenistic kingdoms of Anatolia during the 4th century BCE. It was a considerable time before it appears in Rome. So why do you think that the cult of Mithras originated there, if we take like the actual cult and not the sources? And what is the situation like at that time? How was the society, let's say, or the religious substract there at that time?
So much of this history is not well documented. For instance, we have a consistent pattern in Anatolia of burial sites for these dynasties, in which some kind of representation of Mithra or a cave or rock shelter devoted to Mithra accompanies the ritual burial of the king. Okay, so there's a close association between the dynasty and the cult of the god. And because it's not the kind of built structures more characteristic of the Greek culture within the Hellenistic linguistic zone, these are very ancient Anatolian traditions of using mountaintops, caves, and rock shelters as sites of divinity. It's a ritualized landscape in which you see a crossover between the religious symbolism and the royal cult. And Nemrut Dar is a very good example of that. The massive tumulus on top of a mountain, containing, I think, a burial, but associated with a large terrace in which we see figures of Mithras shaking hands with the ruler and other gods. And it's clearly a very distinctive Anatolian politico-religious nexus of power. So that the religious element in our mind is kind of a formalistic element. But if we cast our awareness back into the early years, the Iron Age and then the Hellenistic Age, people actually felt the presence of religion, deities, fate, destiny as integral parts of the political life. So the separation we have today is not a good guide to understanding the, so to speak, the ethnography of Hellenistic ritual landscape and its crossover with political power.
You have stated that the cult of Mithras was initially confined to the ruling elites of the Armenian and Hellenistic kingdoms.
Mm-hmm.
However, upon its arrival to the Roman Empire, it became accessible to a much wider demographic, including non-citizens, freedmen, and even slaves. What do you think? What are the factors that you think contributed to this significant shift in its demographic reach?
Yeah. See, access to mystery rites has always been conditioned by the political culture of the time and the age. Because the rites were deemed to connect the recipients directly to a deity and allowed the benefits, so to speak, of the deity to flow through the ruler to the land and its people. This notion of a divine kingship in which the rites are reserved for the priest king and his closest family, who would also have been the priesthood of the deity's cult, meant that, as I say, political power and the power of initiation were intimately connected. So we see that throughout the Bronze Age, and then as we just discussed during the Hellenistic period, when you have the autocratic rulers that arose out of Alexander the Great's conquest of the East. Now, even in Athens, we see a development. Let's put this in the context of the Mysteries of Eleusis. They start out as a tribal initiatory system. It gets extended to all Athenians who can afford it and have the time to undergo it. So it's still an elite system, although it's not restricted by law, so to speak. Again, that extends again in another more democratic period to all Hellenes. That's all Greek speakers. So it's kind of now an ethnic initiatory system. And then finally, with the Roman conquest, so to speak, the doors are flung open and it's open to everybody. So the mystery cults have progressed as the political structures in which they exist have evolved. So the evolution into a more democratic, let's call it, reality mirrors exactly the political reality.
Fascinating. So one of the things that is really, really fascinating about the cult of Mithras, of course, is the initiation, and you have actually talked a lot in your book about the initiation, how it could be performed, and then following that Hellenistic substrate that you have identified. So you have read about a lot about the initiations on the cult of Mithras. Although many authors have dared to tackle these questions, we have little evidence of what actually happened in the Mithraic shrines. However, you have identified this threat that we are talking about to propose this new account, actually. Could you elaborate a little bit on this perspective and describe what do you believe the initiation might have entailed?
Okay, so we need to be clear what we're talking about when we talk about initiation and specifically about mystery initiation. Okay, so the cult was actually called the Mysteries of Mithras or the Mysteries of the Persians. It was never known by any other name as far as I'm aware. So The ethnographic construct that we're dealing with is that of a mystery cult, or rites of initiation in higher religions, as Mircea Eliade described them. We need to separate these mystery rites from rites of passage. They're very different. Rites of passage are involuntary. Mystery rites are totally voluntary. Rites of passage are undertaken by everybody in a community. There's no exception. Whereas the mystery rites are always reserved for a very small minority. And again, rites of passage actually change a person's social status, whereas a mystery rite is a purely devotional activity. Doesn't affect the person's status in the larger world. So I conceive of mystery rites as a refinement of the far more primitive rites of possession by a deity. They have many of the same characteristics. And that's clear from the various people over the millennia, who've actually described the experience of mystery initiation. Now, mystery rites in the Near East have a very clear structure and antecedents. They only ever encompass two key ritual processes. There's no further. There's a ritualized cleansing and purification, and then there's the initiation itself, which is the introduction to a specific deity, not to God in any generic sense. So the mystery rite is always the mystery rite of a specific deity. They're kind of predicated on the existence of a hierarchy of higher order beings. And the providential outreach of those beings to people who are devoted to them. So, whether we believe this or not is really immaterial. This is the ethnography of mystery rites and mystery religion. The interaction between the deity and the devotee requires a commensurability. So there needs to be a process of bringing the initiate into alignment with the kind of energy and symbolic features that characterize the deity. And the transmission of the initiatory current requires a lineage. That's to say, it needs to be handed down, typically through a family in most of the mystery sites that had an institutionalized basis in one location. So we see the mysteries of Eleusis were held by the Eumolpidae, and they were granted sometime in the 9th century, and they were still enacting that ritual tradition as late as the 4th century CE. So within a family tradition, it becomes, so to speak, their business as well as their spiritual mission. The outcome of a mystery rite is that merging of human and divine awareness. The Greeks call this henosis. And it's immediately comparable to any of the great mystical visions in which the mystic becomes absorbed in the Godhead. And for a period of time, they experience reality as though peering through the eyes of a deity. And that was the great benefit that mystery initiation confers. Otherwise, it could be pretty terrifying, because there needs to be a kind of almost like a death of the lower persona for this awareness to take place, for this awareness to arise. The persona experiences something like it experienced when we undergo physical death. So the mysteries always had this kind of awesome and fearful aura around them, and for good reason. It was not an experience that you would undertake lightly. Okay. And that accounts more than anything else for the fact that only ever a minority of people undertook this. The most spiritually adventurous or the most spiritually desperate. Because we've got clear accounts of this. Before the deity arrives, they talk about a stream of chthonic beings flooding through the ritual space, and some people are terrified. And then the deity comes, and you experience this process of dying while you're still alive, as the persona is kind of sidelined, and you become absorbed into a deity's awareness. This is possession cult. We've got detailed accounts of this in the ethnographic record, modern ethnographic record, from situations like voodoo, where people have described this process of becoming possessed and of losing self-possession, which is, it's kind of the worst thing that can happen to you in some ways.
Yeah, indeed. And actually, we also have the fathers of the church that actually describe some of this process. I mean, we cannot really believe them because probably they have exaggerated certain things. We know for sure that they have exaggerated, just to controversy a little bit. You have a controversy with the Mithras cult, but we have those records as well that describe the experience being quite a terrific experience. So let's just come back a little bit, because you have mentioned the purification.
Yeah.
That was very important in Mysteric cults, and then also in the cult of Mithras. So what this purification entails, and how do you think it was applied to the Mithraic context in particular? How do you think in the Mithraic cult was actually applied?
So before putting yourself forward for the initiatory process, there needs to be a lot of personal preparation. And this includes fairly standard things like, for instance, washing all the clothing to be used, making offerings to the deity, fasting, abstention, various devotional activities. A person needs to, so to speak, disengage themselves from those aspects of day-to-day reality in order that they can be receptive to a purely spiritual process. Okay, so that's one aspect of purification. That tends not to be documented because it was such a routine part of any religious ritual in the past. Okay, what we do know about is the ritual purification. And as I said earlier, there were two forms of ritual by which the mysteries were enacted. One of them was a ritual purification ritual, and then the full initiation itself. So the ritual purification was a prerequisite. You could not undertake mystery initiation without having undergone a ritual purification. And this was to cleanse what the Greeks called miasma, okay, spiritual impurity arising from acts of injustice or killing, even if these were incurred in the ancestral line. Okay, so we're now talking about a purely spiritual dimension of understanding. So the power of this cleansing ritual, it was called myesis in Greek, was widely acknowledged. And in fact, we know for a fact that most of the people who put themselves forward to undergo mystery initiation only underwent the ritual cleansing. The next step, which is the whole point of the process, was a little too awe-inspiring. But the cleansing ritual was recognized to be of immense value. And we even have some testimony in Plato's Phaedrus. He talks about when diseases and the worst kinds of trouble plague certain families through some ancient ancestral guilt. By taking refuge in prayers and service to the gods, and by purifications and sacred rites, these telete, whoever is afflicted in this way is released from torment. So this notion of ancestral guilt, of miasma, it's a spiritual impurity that attracts chthonic entities and beings to itself. So again, whether you believe this or not is completely irrelevant. But this is the, so to speak, looking at reality through their eyes to understand why they undertook certain ritual processes. Okay. From the frescoes of the Capua Vetere Mithraea, which are, so to speak, the centerpiece of my writing, we can identify three rituals. One, a ritual of induction, as it would appear, simply to be entered into the cult. And then two rituals of purification are undertaken. And in the first one, the candidate is purified using water, and therefore the water deities are invoked to cleanse the, so to speak, astral body, the Ogeides, the subtle body, which is where the ancestral karma, if you want to call it that, is held. So that's the depiction in which they are pouring water. The initiate is kneeling, and the initiator behind him, who's enacting the purification, stands on one of his feet, so that symbolically the initiate is now in the position of the Mithraic bull, and the initiator therefore is channeling Mithras himself. So all mystery rites are structured on the basis of the deity's most characteristic acts and seek to reenact them, and that's how they become powerful.
So that will be, I mean, in this if we interpret that fresco in this way, that will mean that the person, the candidate, will be like a little bit like the one who is being sacrificed.
Yeah, you reenact the tauroctony essentially as the first step of ritual purification. Yes, yeah.
Because at one point, I think you mentioned also this, like the petrogeny being one of the petrogenies, right? Like the Mithras being born from the rock as being one of the main scenes that is being interpreted in the initiation as well.
Yeah. Before that, we have the purification by fire, which was done by the lion grade, and effectively reenacted the purification and made a person, I would say, into the third grade of soldier. As far as I can see, and I agree with Manfred Klaus on this, that is the end of progress. In other words, Mithraism, it doesn't make sense to say there were 7 grades and 7 initiations. It's unhistorical. Okay. So once you've had the purifications, you're ready to become a full initiate. And once you're fully initiated, there's no further grades to go to unless you want to join the priesthood. Okay, so we have the entry grade of Corvus. We have the purification grade, which would allow you to become nymphos, that's to say a bride of the deity. And then the purification by fire, by which you become a soldier. And essentially that's the terminus for the routine initiates into the cult. All the other grade levels are sacerdotal. So when we see the iconography of the petrogenesis, the rock birth, we're seeing a shift in the iconography from ritual representation to the representation of the phenomenology of participation. All of these mystery cults are what you would call non-doctrinal. That's to say, they don't exist with a centralized priesthood with canonical text and readings from the texts and rite. They're performative in the sense that they actually induct people into the cult, and your experience of that initiation is sufficient. There's no need to, so to speak, have a separate instrument for recording the right way to do it. But the weakness of these cults is, of course, that they're very susceptible to people's deaths or moving on. So there needs to be a recording of the bare minimum That's to say, how to perform the rites, and how do you know if the rites have worked? In other words, what are the outcomes that you should expect to see? And I believe the Petrogenesis is a representation of the outcome of full initiation. That's to say, the initiate emerges as Mithras. They are, so to speak, possessed by that deity. They emerge from the cave, which represents our cosmological reality, into a hyper reality in which there's always a reclining figure of the ancient god Kronos. And he's represented as, so to speak, asleep. So the sleep of Kronos. Kronos, of course, governed the golden age of perfection. And it's that merger there of this sense of a golden age and of merging into a timeless zone in which everything is at peace, is a way of trying to articulate a state of mystical bliss consequent upon full initiation into the cult.
Mystery rites, as you highlight, are fundamentally esoteric, enabling initiates to experience profound psychophysical reactions and share visionary experiences through efficacious ritual practices. These intense experiences lend credibility to their perceptions of an otherworldly reality. Could you elaborate a little more on how these rituals are structured to induce such reactions, and what specifically makes these experiences so convincing for those who undergo them?
Yeah,
Complicated question.
it is, because in a sense, once you, according to the ethnography of mystery ritual, and mystery rituals are still enacted today, so we have living ethnographies in certain cultures that we can use for comparison. Okay, apart from structuring the ritual process, that's to say the performative aspect on aspects of the deity's myth cycle, doing so generates what we would call a ritual space. That's to say, another kind of space. It's exfoliated from the bodies of the ritualists themselves, and it has a profoundly distorting effect on awareness. That's to say, ritual space is a kind of machinery for altering awareness amongst a group of ritualists. And you know, we from the contemporary ethnographic record, we have a number of accounts of ethnographers or anthropologists who've experienced the intensity of the ritual space. But I can give you, if I could briefly read out an account, it's from Proclus in the 5th century. It's a first-hand account of becoming, so to speak, immersed in a ritual space. He says, the mysteries cause sympathy of the soul with the ritual in a way that is unintelligible and divine. And some of the initiates are stricken with panic, being filled with divine awe. Others assimilate themselves to the holy symbols, leave their own identity, become at home with the gods, and experience divine possession. So from the horse's mouth, so to speak, that paragraph encompasses the phenomenology of participation. So the key factors, again, whether we believe in this or not is irrelevant. This is the, so to speak, machinery driving these experiences. Generation of ritual space by the energized intent of the ritualists, the providential outreach of the deity to them, and then the intercession of an initiatory priesthood, who have received a valid initiatory transmission, become possessed by the god, and are then able to transmit it to others. In other words, the ritual space is a contagious space. So those anthropologists who have, so to speak, accidentally, as part of their documentation, become wrapped up in an emerging ritual space tend to experience reality as the ritualists do. They see and partake in things which are physically impossible. outside of the ritual space. And again, we have well documented cases of this. I've included them in the book so that people can, read them and just react themselves.
Well, one of the points here is like that you are doing these parallels between the cult of Mithras and other initiation cults in the ancient world,
Yeah.
like the rites of Eleusis and others.
Yeah.
And you quote a fragment from Cicero regarding this that I will read as well, and that I think it's quite remarkable. By their means, we have been brought out of our barbarous and savage mode of life and educated and refined to a state of civilization. We have gained the power not only to live happily, but also to die with better hope. So we see here, like they consider, or at least Cicero considered, the mysteries like being something that helped civilize people.
Yeah.
And that's quite interesting. And I think it's also interesting to talk about how initiation can help us to live happily and also to die with a better hope. At least for them was the case, right?
Yep. So it's difficult to unpack that paragraph, to, so to speak, translate it into other terms. It's so direct. But the heart of the initiatory moment is this state of ecstatic non-dual awareness. And whether you're looking at the Christian mystics, St. John of the Cross, or Teresa of Avila, or you're looking at the like the Kundalini mystics, Muktananda, his accounts, accounts from voodoo, this awareness of entering into a divine state of awareness, of seeing the world as though you were a god, essentially sanctifies every element of reality. So that whereas we, in our normal personas, are continually discriminating between aspects of reality as good, bad, harmful, fruitful, productive, unproductive, and so on, we're always in a state of categorization. This state, this sleep of Kronos, is a state of ecstatic non-dual awareness in which there's an identification with all sentient life. And it is such a elevated vision vis-a-vis our normal day-to-day reality that it flows back into our day-to-day lives, and it kind of relativizes the things that annoy and upset us on a daily basis. It makes them less of a final judgment on reality. People are tending to see their personal situation writ large in the universe, whereas this is the reverse of it. This is like a godlike awareness writ large now through the persona. And therefore it changes the way you relate to people, you relate to other animals and to nature itself, because you've had a glimpse of a indissoluble connection to all of that. You're kind of at one with it. And even though that visionary experience recedes over time, it retains, it plants seeds in our daily awareness that can never be dug up entirely. So this is what Cicero is talking about, the transformation. The other aspect of this is that because it was taking place in such a timeless zone, awareness in a timeless zone, we have a sense of a continuity of being that arises from it. And this was expressed in the Orphic saying, birth or life, death, life. And it's very much a gift of the mysteries that there was a sense that it bestowed a sense of a continuity, a higher continuity of one's being from life to life. And this changes in a fundamental way our perspective on death. So it's closely related to the idea of metapsychosis, that there is that part of us which continues to propagate through time and space in different realities and in different cultures.
You also suggest that one of the core myths of esoteric Orpheus revolves around the Titan's murder of a god in the form of a bull, which directly parallels the tauroctony, the central image of the Mithraic iconography on top of Gilgamesh. We talked at the beginning of this interview about also the passage from Gilgamesh. Could you elaborate a little more on this second connection? How does Orphism myth inform our understanding of the Mithraic bull slaying scene, and what does it reveal about the deeper meaning of the ritual act?
This notion of the bull killing, certainly in the Hellenistic age, as far as I can see, is unique to Orphism. That's to say, Dionysus is killed in the form of a bull. He actually shapeshifts into a number of forms, but it's in the form of a bull that he's actually stabbed. And then the myth goes on, or Orphism goes on to say they cut the bull up, they consume it, which has, of course, its direct reflection in the banqueting scene in the cult of Mithras. And because they have, so to speak, consumed part of a god, they're imbued with the divinity that was within the deity. And this is kind of a tale that seeks to explain why humans are both profane and divine at the same time. Now, I'm not aware of, as I say, we've traced this stabbing of the bull in that particular manner all the way back to the Epic of Gilgamesh, and probably long before then in an oral form. So we can't attribute Orphism as the source of the bull killing. But it is strange that it is the one esoteric Hellenistic cult that sees the deity killed in the form of a bull, consumed, and that is connected with this process of becoming divine oneself.
So you have identified a lot of different things. For instance, the Orphic traditions. You talk a lot about Orphic traditions,
Yeah.
but even before, in the Bronze Era, the Chaldean, the Neoplatonic root as well. And then, have you identified anything that is exclusive, or is just something original from the cult of Mithras?
No, I couldn't. That's the curious thing. Everything within the cult has a iconographic, a mythic, or a metaphysical correlate in Hellenistic and earlier culture. Everything. I mean, it even includes the torch bearers as symbolic representations of the solstices. You know, again, the metaphysics of the solstices, the gates of the sun, goes back to Plato and long before him. So, no, I couldn't find any element of Mithraic iconography that was unique to the Roman period. And even the way in which the tauroctony is visualized in Mithraism, that iconic image, is a direct copy of the goddess Nike sacrificing a bull. They've taken that original image from the 5th century BCE and just adjusted the hand position and removed the wings from the figure. Otherwise, it's an identical representation of the Mithraic tauroctony. So not even the iconic central figure of the cult is unique in that sense. It's slightly adapted version of something which is well known at least in 500 BCE, if not a long time earlier. So yeah, I'm sorry, there's nothing unique whatsoever.
That's not about news, actually. That means that it's actually this tradition, right?
The
It's just developed and
continuity.
crystallized at one point, right?
Yeah, the continuity of the entire iconography and metaphysics of the cult of Mithras is enormous. Is absolutely enormous. We just have huge holes in the evidential, so to speak, history of it. But we're slowly filling those in. And one thing I'd like to add is that the archaeology in Anatolia that is now going ahead is on a far wider basis than it has been for many decades. There's been a huge growth of new universities here with departments of archaeology. Um, and so there's an absolutely vast amount of archaeological research. It's documented in Turkish, but it hasn't surfaced. Most of the major books on the cult of Mithras, which we consider to be authoritative, Beck and the Gordon, the other writers, Klaus, most of them are 30 to 40 years old now. And over the past 20, 30 years, there's been a vast expansion of archaeological departments working in Anatolia with prehistory and history itself. And so we have all kinds of rock shelters and caves being explored, tentatively identified as Mithraic, but they don't find their way into the public domain of Mithraic scholarship at this time. There's like a delay between archaeological research, translation, interpretation, and then that information becoming available to a larger Mithraic scholarship. And certainly to the general reader, like ourselves, who are not professional archaeologists. So it's going to be quite some time before the full history, of the cult throughout the Hellenistic and earlier periods. It's going to be a long time before that is fully understood. But right now, the signs are excellent that there's a lot of evidence out there.
Well, I think we have come to an end, even if the conversation will continue. And I invite all our readers or viewers or whatever, the people that follows the new Mithraion to actually don't miss Ritual and Epiphany in the Mysteries of Mithras, because it's quite revealing. There is a lot of information that usually is super well documented, and then we go very deep into this tradition and also all the sources and how it evolved. So I highly, as usual, recommend your work. It was a real pleasure to talk to you again.
Yeah.
And let's hope to see you soon, probably in one of the things that you are doing. I know you are preparing different things, and then you have this
5th of June, we're going to talk together in Watkins Bookshop online. Not at the bookshop, unfortunately. I wish we could meet at the bookshop, but anyway, we'll be online at Watkins Bookshop, 5th of June.
Exactly. And then there is also this course that you are doing in Turin, I think.
Yeah. We'll
about
look at
the Sola Busca, that we already talk a lot here in the new Mithraion about the Sola Busca. So I invite. It's I don't know if there is still places available for that.
Not sure. The last day of August and first 3 days of September, we'll be exploring the Draconian current through the iconography of the Sola Busca. It's a workshop. It's not just lectures. So we have a chance to work with the artistic representation of these forces as well. So I'm looking forward to that. It'll be fun.
Yeah,
we'll visit Il Menghello in Milan, one of the world's premier tarot shops, and hopefully we'll see the Sola Busca cards themselves in the Brera Gallery. That's the plan. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. It'll be a good weekend.
I will be there with you, so that will be a pleasure also to meet in person after all these conversations. Thank you so much, Peter, and again, congratulations for this new book. It's really
thank you very much, Andrew. It's a pleasure.